The fifth time the cops showed up at my cabin, my dog didn't even bark. He just gave me that look like, again. And honestly, I felt the same way. 5 police visits, 3 bogus citations, 0 crimes, all because of a homeowners association I didn't belong to. Not legally, not socially, not in any form whatsoever. They didn't own my land. They didn't own the lake. But that didn't stop them from trying to own me. I live alone, quietly, off a gravel road near a wide, peaceful lake. I mind my own business. I fish. I chop wood. I take care of my dog, Jake. And for 10 years, that was enough. Then, one day, everything changed. It started with a knock on the door. A sheriff's deputy stood on my porch, sunglasses on, hand resting on his belt. Morning, he said, "We've had a noise complaint. Came from Highland Shores, HOA." That made me laugh. The only noise around here comes from loons on the water and maybe a fish splashing at dawn. The officer didn't seem too convinced, but he didn't press the issue either. He looked around, asked a few questions, then left. I figured that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 3 days later, a different pair of officers showed up. This time it was about unauthorized structures. One of them pointed at my tool shed and said it was reported as a non-compliant accessory building. I showed them the permits. I showed them the survey. I even walked them through the layout of the lot. They took notes and apologized, said it was likely a misunderstanding. But the complaints didn't stop. Each time they came, the accusations got stranger. Unregistered watercraft, burning trash, short-term rentals. I wasn't running an Airbnb. I wasn't lighting anything but a legal campfire. My boat hadn't moved in weeks. After the 3rd visit, I knew this wasn't about laws or violations. It was about something else. Control. The HOA wanted to scare me off, push me into compliance with their rules. But they made one huge mistake. They assumed I was part of them. I wasn't, never had been. And once I started digging, I found out just how little authority they actually had over my land. They'd been bluffing, weaponizing police reports to enforce fake rules over property they didn't control. And I was about to expose all of it in court, because this time they messed with the wrong guy. I bought the cabin more than a decade ago, back when this area was still remote, back when the only neighbors were deer and ducks. It was an old place, built in the 70s, solid, humble, and quiet. No internet, no HOA, just me and the lake. For the longest time, the world left me alone. That's all I wanted. Then Highland Shores came in. They started developing the far end of the lake, waterfront homes, golf carts, tennis courts, and then, of course, the HOA. At first, they left me alone. I wasn't in their neighborhood. I wasn't on their maps. My property was outside their lines. But a few years ago, something shifted. They started claiming shared lake access, sent out newsletters, held meetings. They posted new signs at the old dock across from my cabin. Private HOA use only. Then came the complaints. They couldn't force me to join, but they could make my life hell. And they did. The first few visits from the police were annoying. But by the 5th time, it was clear this wasn't a mistake. It was a coordinated attempt to pressure me. And I wasn't having it. Her name was Barbara Linnett. She moved into one of the newer homes across the lake about 2 years before this all started. Big white house, blue shutters, perfect lawn. She was the self-appointed queen of Highland Shores. Barbara didn't like me from the start. I wasn't part of the neighborhood. I didn't show up to community events. I didn't ask permission to use the lake. She sent me a letter once, said she hoped I'd consider joining the HOA voluntarily to improve harmony on the lake. I ignored it. A month later, I started getting citations taped to my mailbox. Fake ones. No legal header, no signature, just Highland Shores violation notice. They said I was breaking noise rules, fire regulations, even community decorum. None of it meant anything, but the message was clear. They wanted me gone. When that didn't work, they went further. They began filing official complaints with the county sheriff's office. Each time they made sure to reference community safety and HOA enforcement. The problem is the sheriff's office has to respond when they get complaints. especially repeated ones, even if they're baseless. But I was documenting everything, every visit, every conversation. I had security footage, timestamps, body cam clips from the officers, and even GPS data showing that my land was outside their boundaries. And then Barbara made her biggest mistake. One of the officers accidentally left his body cam running while walking back to his cruiser. In the background, you could hear Barbara saying, "Just keep filing reports. He'll give in eventually." That was the moment everything changed. I wasn't going to take this anymore. I reached out to an old friend of mine, Dan Reddick, small-town lawyer with a sharp edge and a zero-tolerance policy for bullies. When I explained the situation and showed him the footage, he just shook his head and said, "Let's make them regret it." We didn't just file a harassment suit. Dan went further. He filed for damages, defamation, misuse of public resources, abuse of power, and he included Barbara by name. We also submitted a motion to challenge Highland Shore's claim over the lake, citing historical records and property boundaries that proved they didn't own or control more than a small dock. Once the court accepted our case, I could feel the mood shift. Barbara tried to downplay it at first, said it was all a misunderstanding. Then she brought in her own team of lawyers. They sent a letter demanding I drop the case and agree to mediate. I refused. If they wanted a fight, they were going to get one. And they were going to lose. 3 weeks after we filed the lawsuit, the first hearing was scheduled. I was in the middle of cleaning fish on the dock when my phone buzzed. "It was Dan, they've been served," he said. According to him, Barbara's reaction was almost theatrical. Apparently, she stormed out of a board meeting yelling that this was a personal vendetta and that he's just a lake bum with a tin roof. She wasn't entirely wrong about the roof, but I had the law on my side now. What Barbara and her HOA pals hadn't counted on was the paper trail. Every visit, every report, every citation, we had it documented. Dan compiled it all into a timeline that painted a crystal clear picture. This wasn't oversight. This was targeted harassment. Better still, the county zoning office confirmed in writing that my property had never been part of Highland Shores HOA. No annexation, no buyout, no agreements. In fact, their so-called lake jurisdiction ended a good 200 feet before my property line. That detail alone made the judge raise an eyebrow. Barbara tried to claim the HOA had evolving boundaries and communal stewardship over the lake, but the judge wasn't buying it. "Is he a member of your HOA?" the judge asked. "No," Barbara said, teeth clenched. "And you've sent law enforcement to his property 5 times?" "Yes." "That's going to be a problem." That's when I knew the tide was turning. A week before the second hearing, something unexpected happened. An anonymous email landed in my inbox. No subject line, just a zip file attached. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside were scanned pages of a meeting agenda and a recording. It was from the Highland Shores HOA's private board session, and judging from the voices, it wasn't meant for public ears. Barbara's voice was unmistakable. "I don't care if it's outside our map. That cabin is an eyesore. If we have to call the sheriff every week, so be it." Another board member chimed in. "Can't we get him cited for illegal use of the dock or shoreline?" "He doesn't use ours," someone else said. "He has his own dock." "So what? Find something." It was all there, proof they were actively plotting to manufacture complaints. I forwarded the whole thing to Dan. "This is gold," he said. "If this gets admitted as evidence, they're toast." We submitted the documents with a formal request for authentication. The court approved. Barbara's team tried to fight it, but the damage was done. Her credibility? Shredded. Her motives? Exposed. That email changed everything. It wasn't just about my cabin anymore. It was about abuse of power, conspiracy, and a full-blown vendetta. And people were starting to pay attention. Small-town drama doesn't usually make headlines, but this time it did. After the leaked audio was entered into the court record, a local journalist wrote a piece called "The HOA That Went Too Far." It spread fast. Within 2 days, the story was picked up by a regional TV station. The reporter even asked to film a segment by my dock. I agreed. On camera, I told him the truth. I bought this land fair and square. I've lived peacefully for years. These people tried to bully me out using fake rules and law enforcement. But I'm not going anywhere. Barbara, meanwhile, refused interviews. But one of the HOA board members resigned. Quietly, without a statement, people in Highland Shores started whispering. Others started digging into the HOA's finances. Dan warned me, they're on the ropes. But don't let up. Not yet. We were weeks away from the full hearing, and now the pressure wasn't just legal, it was public. Suddenly, Barbara's perfect little lakeside kingdom was cracking. And I was just getting started. Barbara didn't take embarrassment well. A few days after the news story aired, I woke up to find 2 county code officers inspecting my boat dock. I didn't call this inspection, I said. They looked confused. We got a request from the Highland Shores HOA. I showed them my survey again, showed them the email from zoning. They left, annoyed that they'd been dragged into another mess. But the message was clear. Barbara wasn't done. 2 nights later, I heard the crunch of tires in my gravel drive just after midnight. Jake growled. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out onto the porch. A car was turning around, no headlights on, just backing out slowly, disappearing up the road. I called the sheriff the next morning. This time, they took it seriously. Apparently, I wasn't the only one complaining. Other homeowners, even inside the HOA, had started filing reports about threats, shady fines, and unexplained board decisions. Turns out, I was just the first one to fight back. Barbara had built her little empire on fear and intimidation. But now the whole thing was beginning to unravel, and court day was almost here. The courthouse was small, like most things in our county. 1 floor, a dozen rows of benches, a single flag behind the judge's chair. But the energy in that room? Heavy. Barbara showed up in a navy suit and pearls. Her lawyer looked tired. I came in jeans and a clean flannel. Dan wore his usual, a tan jacket and that calm, dangerous smile. We opened with the timeline of harassment, police records, security footage, the emails, the audio file from their private meeting. Barbara's lawyer tried to object, but the judge waved him off. Sit down. I want to hear this. Dan laid out the whole story. Every fake report, every misuse of law enforcement, every attempt to strong-arm me into submission over a property they had no legal right to touch. Then came the zoning rep. Under oath, he confirmed. Highland Shores had 0 authority over my land or dock. Barbara's lawyer argued that the HOA had acted in good faith. The judge stared at him for a full 5 seconds. Calling the sheriff 5 times on someone outside your jurisdiction is not good faith. It's harassment. Barbara's face went pale. The judge wasn't done. I've seen overreach from HOAs before, but this is different. This was personal. We were winning, and Barbara knew it. Just when we thought the case was sewn up, Barbara's lawyer called a surprise witness. We'd like to bring Mr. Stephen Lang to the stand, he said. I exchanged a look with Dan. We didn't recognize the name. Stephen turned out to be a former HOA vice president, someone who had mysteriously resigned a few months before all this started. Slim guy, comb over, eyes darting like he didn't want to be there. Barbara's lawyer tried to use him as their silver bullet. Mr. Lang, can you confirm that the HOA's actions toward Mr. Blake's cabin were based on safety concerns? Lang shifted in his seat. Well, that's what we were told. I guess. Told by who? Mostly Barbara. And the board. He kept glancing at Barbara. She was staring daggers at him. And did you believe those concerns were legitimate? Lang hesitated. At first, yeah. But later, I had questions. Dan leaned over and whispered, "Watch this blow up in their face." And it did, because under cross-examination, Lang admitted that Barbara often bypassed board votes to make unilateral decisions. He even mentioned that she once bragged about how once we get him with cops enough times, he'll sell. The courtroom buzzed. The judge tapped his gavel. Order. But the damage was done. Their own witness had admitted to a vendetta. Barbara's face looked like stone. We didn't just have a strong case anymore. We had their own people unraveling the narrative. That night, after court adjourned, Dan and I went back through files. Something Lang said kept echoing in my head. She kept saying the cabin would drive down resale values. I started wondering, why would one private cabin matter so much? That's when we found it. Buried deep in one of the HOA's past newsletters was a map showing future plans for lakefront community spaces. One of those plans included an expansion dock and clubhouse right where my cabin stood. They had development plans, and I was in their way. It wasn't about rules. It wasn't about property values. It was about money. The next morning, Dan filed a motion to admit the development plan as evidence. Barbara's lawyer tried to object again, but the judge allowed it. He stared at the exhibit for a long moment. So, this expansion would have required Mr. Blake's property to be acquired? Yes, Your Honor, Dan said, and it was never for sale. Barbara looked like she wanted to melt into the floor. Now, we weren't just talking harassment. We were talking about a planned takeover disguised as rule enforcement. The judge didn't say a word, but I could see it in his eyes. The decision was already forming. Word spread fast. Once the development plans came out, residents in Highland Shores started asking questions. Local reporters ran the headline, HOA tried to take lake property for private expansion? By the time court resumed the next day, 2 more board members had resigned. One even submitted a statement to the court saying they had serious concerns about how Barbara had been managing decisions without full board votes. It was unraveling in real time. Meanwhile, the sheriff's office sent a statement confirming that Barbara had requested dispatch to my property multiple times, despite being told the land wasn't within HOA jurisdiction. Barbara's lawyer tried to paint her as overzealous, but well-intentioned. The judge wasn't buying it. He said, there is a line between passionate leadership and abuse of authority. In this case, that line was crossed repeatedly. We weren't even done with testimony yet, but I could feel it. The tide wasn't just turning. It was crashing. 2 days before the final ruling, the county sheriff himself showed up in court, not in uniform, in jeans and a windbreaker, like he'd just come from a morning patrol. He was called as a witness, not by Barbara's team, but by the court itself. When the judge asked him about the multiple calls to my cabin, he didn't hold back. We told them 3 times we had no authority to enforce HOA violations outside their legal boundary, he said. They insisted it was a civil matter. But dispatch logs show they used emergency lines. That's misuse of county resources. Barbara's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. The sheriff went on. And let's be honest, Judge, if every HOA called 911 every time someone painted a shed the wrong color, we wouldn't have any deputies left for real emergencies. The courtroom chuckled, but then the sheriff turned serious. They tried to use us as muscle. I don't like that. And I've got 3 deputies who'll confirm they were pressured by HOA reps directly. That statement alone was damning. Barbara looked straight ahead, motionless. No more whispering. No more side glances. This wasn't just about property anymore. Now, it was about abuse of government services. The next morning, Barbara didn't show up. Her lawyer stood alone. When asked about her absence, he simply said she won't be attending the final hearing. Dan leaned over. She knows it's over. We still had to make closing arguments. Dan kept it simple. Your Honor, this is a story of power misused, of harassment disguised as policy, and of a private citizen standing up not just for his land, but for the idea that no one, not even an HOA, gets to make up rules just because they feel like it. The judge took a deep breath, and then, for the first time in days, he smiled. I'll have my ruling ready tomorrow. As we stepped out into the morning sun, Dan clapped me on the back. You didn't just win your peace, he said. You exposed their whole machine. But it wasn't quite over yet. The ruling was still ahead, and what it included would shock everyone, including me. Court was packed the next morning. Locals, press, even a few former HOA members took seats in the back rows. The judge walked in holding a thick manila folder. His face gave away nothing. After careful review of evidence, testimony, and submitted documentation, he began, this court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Blake, The air felt electric, but then he kept going. The court also finds the HOA, under President Barbara Keller, knowingly and repeatedly acted outside its legal boundaries. He tapped his pen against the bench. Therefore, the HOA is ordered to pay compensatory damages to Mr. Blake in the amount of $185,000 for harassment, legal fees, and emotional distress. Additionally, punitive damages of $75,000 are applied for misuse of public emergency resources. A collective gasp filled the room. Barbara's lawyer stood up, pale. "Your Honor, we intend to appeal." The judge raised a hand. "Appeal all you want, but this decision stands unless overturned by higher court. And if you wish to try that, I suggest you come better prepared." Reporters were already outside by the time we stepped through the courthouse doors. Dan leaned in, grinning. "Told you. Big." But even with the win, I had the feeling it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. That same week, 3 more members of the Highland Shores HOA board resigned. They didn't even hold a meeting, just emailed their notices and walked away. I later found out 2 of them had voted against going after me early on, but were silenced by Barbara's leadership. With her credibility shattered and the court order hitting the HOA's finances hard, the board was now fractured beyond repair. Residents started organizing their own town hall-style meetings. One neighbor told me they were pushing to dissolve the HOA entirely. Too much power, too little transparency, he said. What happened to you could have happened to any of us. That comment stuck with me, because as satisfying as the court win was, it uncovered something bigger. This wasn't just about me. It was about how easily small positions of power can spiral into control and harassment, especially when no one pushes back. But that wasn't the craziest part. The craziest part was what I got in the mail a week later. It was a thick envelope, no return address, just a gold HOA seal on the flap. Inside was a letter, formal, typed, and cold. It read, "Mr. Blake, in light of recent developments, the Highland Shores Homeowners Association would like to make a formal offer to purchase your lakefront property. The board believes a peaceful transition would benefit both parties and allow our community development plans to proceed smoothly. Enclosed is our proposed offer, $400,000. I stared at the number. It was over market value. They were still trying to buy me out. After everything, after harassment, police calls, lawsuits, public exposure, they still wanted the land, still wanted me gone. Dan burst out laughing when I showed him. This is how they admit defeat. They lost legally, so now they're trying to buy their way out. I didn't laugh. Not yet, because I had one idea. If they wanted my land that badly, maybe I could flip this whole situation even harder. I called a meeting at the lake cabin that weekend, not with the HOA, with the residents. To my surprise, 20 people showed up. They were tired of fines for stupid things, tired of fear, tired of not knowing if their next fence post would lead to a lawsuit. I laid the offer letter on the table. I'm not selling, I told them, but I have a counteroffer in mind, not to them, to you. I suggested we form our own lake cooperative. No presidents, no fines, just a shared agreement to respect boundaries and handle disputes like adults, not dictators. I didn't expect applause, but I got it. By the time the sun went down, we had 10 signatures and a plan. The board's power was slipping fast. Without the residents backing them, they were just a name on paper. But the twist? That wasn't even the best part, because someone else came to that meeting, someone I hadn't seen in years, and they had a proposal of their own. Near the end of the meeting, an older man stepped forward. Looked like he belonged on a fishing boat, but he carried a briefcase instead of a tackle box. "Name's Carl," he said. "I used to do land surveys for the county." He opened his case and pulled out some very old blueprints, topographical maps, parcel documentation. "This whole time," he said, tapping a faded section of the map, "they've been claiming your land sits within their future expansion zone." He looked me in the eye. "But this entire lakefront, this whole lower section, was never part of the HOA's incorporation paperwork. The deed boundaries stop almost 300 feet short of your cabin. They've been bluffing Dead silence. He passed me the maps. They're clear as daylight where the markers. The HOA's jurisdiction ended well before the tree line behind my cabin. Dan muttered, "They tried to seize land they don't even legally touch." Carl nodded. "Might want to file a federal complaint too. That kind of fraudulent claim? That's not just shady. That's criminal." I stared down at the map. The truth laid out in ink. We hadn't just won. We were standing on undeniable proof that the HOA had built its entire case on a lie. And that meant this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something bigger. After Carl left, I scanned the documents again under my cabin's lantern light. That map changed everything. The HOA's entire campaign, the police reports, fines, threats, were based on land they never legally owned. I wasn't just a nuisance to them. I was evidence. Dan called in a favor from a friend at the county recorder's office. They confirmed what Carl said, and then dropped something even bigger. Someone, they said, has been filing amendments to old HOA boundary records. Recently, quietly, looks like someone was trying to alter the official maps. We sent all the evidence, copies of the altered documents, Carl's original maps, and legal filings straight to the state's real estate fraud division. A week later, a black SUV parked outside my cabin. A man in a suit stepped out. No badge showing, but I knew the look. He was federal. "Mr. Blake," he asked, "we're opening a multi-agency investigation. We'd like your cooperation." And just like that, the case grew teeth. 3 days after that visit, a man in an orange vest and clipboard showed up at my lakefront gate. "Routine shoreline inspection," he said casually. "Need to check erosion compliance." I raised an eyebrow. "Funny," I said, "that gate's on private land. And I didn't call anyone." He tried to push past me. That's when Dan stepped out of the woods behind him with a camera already recording. "Hey man," Dan said, "you got a badge? Agency? Work order." The guy froze, then bolted, ran straight to a truck waiting by the road, no logos, no license plates visible. They peeled off before we could get more than a partial plate. But I knew what that was. Intimidation. Or worse, evidence tampering. They were scrambling. They knew what was coming. And I'd be ready. Then came the letter I didn't expect. Not from the HOA. Not from a lawyer. From the county fire department. Apparently, they'd been alerted by the feds about my situation, and they wanted to meet. When I arrived at the station, Chief Rodriguez sat me down in his office. He pulled up a digital map on his monitor. "This," he said, pointing at a narrow trail near the lake, "is your private access road. But here's the thing, it's also our only viable emergency path to respond to wildfire alerts in the southern forest basin." I blinked. "So, if the HOA blocked me, they also blocked us," he said, "which is a direct violation of state emergency response codes." Then he handed me a form. "I'm submitting a declaration that your access road is now a protected emergency route. That makes any obstruction, including gates, threats, or patrols by non-law enforcement, a felony under state law." He shook my hand. "You just helped us more than you know." The more I pushed back, the more dominoes fell. Word spread fast. It started with a small local paper covering the court decision. Then a regional news blog picked it up. And within days, a full news crew showed up at the cabin. Cameraman, producer, and a field reporter named Julia who didn't waste time. "Mr. Blake," she said, "what's your response to the HOA's refusal to comment on the federal investigation?" I looked her in the eye. "They sent cops to my home 5 times. They filed fake maps. They tried to erase my property line with a pen. And now they're silent." Dan handed her a copy of Carl's original survey. "They're not silent. They're cornered." She nodded slowly. "Can we film the lakefront?" We gave her full access. By that evening, the story was on the 6 o'clock news. Drone shots of the cabin, old map overlays, interviews with neighbors, even footage of the fake inspector fleeing into the woods. The headline? "Local man exposes HOA overreach state and federal agencies now investigating fraud." That's when things really exploded. It happened early on a Monday. Unmarked vehicles, men in windbreakers, boxes carried out. The HOA's main office was raided by federal investigators, search warrants in hand, seizing hard drives, paper files, and internal communications. Barbara Keller, the HOA president, wasn't seen that day. But according to a neighbor who worked near the strip mall, she tried to slip in through the back entrance, only to be escorted out in handcuffs. The official charge, fraudulent misrepresentation of property boundaries. Unofficially, she'd been orchestrating a years-long plan to absorb nearby lakefront land into HOA control and flip it for profit to real estate developers. My land was just the first domino, and if I hadn't fought back, it would have worked. Now, with half the board under investigation and residents voting to dissolve the HOA entirely, I knew one thing. This fight wasn't just about a cabin anymore. It was about what happens when one person stands up and says, no, while the federal raid had turned the tide, Dan wasn't done digging. That evening, he showed up at my cabin holding a flash drive and a stack of printed documents. These aren't from the raid, he said. These were leaked by someone inside the HOA. I scanned the folder's label, Cedar Trail Expansion, Phase 1 to 3, Confidential. It detailed something far more sinister than I expected. The HOA had planned not just to claim my cabin's land, they were laying the groundwork to annex over 40 lakefront properties. They called it community unification. But the truth was clear. Forced membership inflated dues, and eventually selling the land to out-of-state developers. I saw notes on targeted residents, even psychological profiles. One old couple had been labeled low resistance. Another, marked as a problematic holdout, had reportedly suffered a mysterious deck fire just 2 months prior. That wasn't a coincidence. Dan leaned back. They weren't just overstepping. They were playing God. We sent the files to the state attorney's office and the news network. And then we waited. The lakefront residents had never really met as a group. Most of us preferred peace, solitude, and staying out of each other's business. But everything changed after the raid. One by one, trucks and boats arrived that Saturday night. Camp chairs unfolded. Lanterns lit. Someone brought cider, someone else made chili. We were neighbors, but now we were something else, allies. A retired Navy vet named Joseph stood up first. I built my cabin here after the war. Quiet. No rules. No nonsense. That HOA tried to fine me $5,000 for using firewood they claimed was unregistered forestry. Another man chimed in. They tried to ban my teenage son from fishing off our dock. Said he was trespassing on our own dock. Then someone asked, what now? Do we rebuild the HOA with better people or burn the whole thing down? A quiet voice from the back spoke up. It was Maggie, a widow in her 70s. I say we take back what's ours. No boards, no presidents, just neighbors who look out for each other. The fire crackled as we nodded. Something had changed in all of us. The fallout reached even deeper. A few days later, Dan stormed into my cabin holding his phone. Guess who just got disbarred? He said, grinning wide. It was Martin Ellis, the HOA's longtime legal bulldog, the same man who'd filed the cease and desist letters against me and pushed the boundary disputes into court. Turns out, Ellis had been operating under a web of undisclosed interests, including partial stakes in the very developer firm that had been poised to buy the annex land. Conflict of interest, perjury, obstruction of justice. They nailed him on all three. The state bar revoked his license, and according to rumors, he was now cooperating with prosecutors to cut a deal. Dan said, he flipped. He's giving them everything, emails, memos, even meeting recordings. And then he added, we're not even at the bottom yet. At this point, it felt like the entire operation was collapsing under its own weight, and we were still only scratching the surface. One morning, I woke up to find my dog barking wildly at the porch. When I stepped outside, I saw tire tracks in the gravel, but no sign of anyone. I might have dismissed it until I went back inside and saw something strange under the bookshelf, a blinking red light. Dan rushed over. He brought a frequency scanner. Sure enough, there was a listening device hidden inside a decorative log, planted so neatly it looked like part of the cabin. Whoever left it had been inside my home. Dan removed it and bagged it carefully. We reported it to the agents handling the investigation. Later that night, Dan sat on the porch looking out at the lake. "They're still watching," he said, "even after the raid, even after the arrests. Someone higher up hasn't given up." I looked at the peaceful reflection of the moon in the water. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. It was almost too on the nose. A black SUV pulled up to the edge of my land, and out stepped a man in a tailored suit and city shoes far too clean for the gravel. "Mr. Blake," he said, extending a hand I didn't take. "I represent All Vista Properties. We'd like to make you an offer." I crossed my arms. "Not selling." He smiled like a man used to getting his way. "You haven't even heard the number. I don't need to." He pulled out a folder, slid it toward me. Inside was a letter of intent, 7 figures. Just a sign. More if I agreed to sell the development rights around the lake. He didn't know the fight I'd been through. Or maybe he did, and thought money would fix it. I handed the folder back. "Tell your bosses the lake's not for sale. And neither am I." His smile disappeared. "We'll see," he said quietly. "Everyone has a price." But I didn't blink. I'd been harassed, threatened, framed, bugged, and I was still standing. If they wanted a war, I'd give them one. 6 months after the HOA's 5th attempt to sick the cops on me, I finally got my day in court. It wasn't just a land dispute hearing. This had evolved into something far bigger, a class action lawsuit backed by 11 other property owners from a lake. Dan prepped me for everything: depositions, witness prep, media, even potential retaliation. The courtroom was packed. Local news cameras lined the back wall. The judge, a sharp, no-nonsense woman with a military haircut, glanced over the case file and raised an eyebrow. "You're telling me the HOA repeatedly trespassed, sent law enforcement without jurisdiction, and attempted land grabs on non-member property?" Dan stood. "Yes, Your Honor. And we have proof." Over the next 4 days, our team laid it all out. Secret HOA memos, false complaints, financial conflicts, even the bug found in my cabin. And then, the twist that changed everything. Dan called a surprise witness. Officer Terry, the deputy who had responded to the HOA's calls 3 separate times. He stood up and admitted, under oath, that he had been pressured to act on unofficial complaints and had even been promised a private property stake in a future lake development. The entire courtroom went silent. The judge leaned forward. "You were bribed by an HOA?" Terry nodded. "Yes, ma'am. And I'm sorry. I was wrong." That testimony turned the tide. When the verdict came, the judge didn't just rule in our favor. She invalidated the HOA's claims to any surrounding lake properties, fined the board for fraud and harassment, and referred 3 members for criminal prosecution. But that wasn't all. 3 weeks later, I stood on my dock, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise break across the still lake waters. Dan called with the final update. "They're done," he said. "State revoked their HOA charter. The land annexation plans are dead. And your lawsuit payout." He paused. $768,000. I nearly dropped the mug. "Not bad for a guy who just wanted to fish," I muttered. But I didn't keep all the money. I used part of it to help the older neighbors repair their cabins. Another portion funded a community legal defense fund, so nobody would ever feel powerless again. The rest? I bought the wooded strip of land right behind the old HOA president's mansion. Put up a big sign. Private property, NO trespassing, free fishing for neighbors, only word spread fast. The lake was peaceful again. No patrols. No threats. No fake fines taped to doors. Just neighbors, fireside stories, and the freedom we were promised when we bought our land. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales of standing up to injustice, fighting back against power, and winning big in the end, hit that like button and subscribe to HOA Nightmares. More stories like this are coming. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next.